let's get the questions though that you guys sent in. First one from X comes from Hittin Skins, whatever it is. I would love to know how the Eagles have been able to work around the salary cap by backloading all their star player contracts with void years. And if a bill ever comes due, how come other teams don't do the same thing? Look at Mahomes cap hit versus Hurts cap hit. Touched on it a little earlier, but what do you think about this one, Joel?
Well, I'm going to hit more the Mahomes part because we have touched on the other part.
Yep.
That everyone seems to forget or didn't know that when Mahomes did that lifetime contract, that it was very backloaded from the standpoint that his cap numbers were low initially and the cash was minuscule compared to other quarterback deals. So that allowed Kansas City to accumulate more talent during that window. Once the quarterback market started changing, they did renegotiate it, not new years. They just accelerate the cash flow forward. What they do each year is there's a huge roster bonus. It's now a May roster bonus as opposed to like a third or fifth day league roster bonus, where most of his money is there. So that's the break glass in case of emergency move they can use if they need cap room. So they could turn his roster bonus, chop it down significantly because they have until May to do it, and get as much cap room as they need. They could do a maximum restructure or just enough that they think they could do. But that contract is so long, I think it runs through the 2030 league year, that they still have plenty of time to prorate that thing out even more. So that was their way of handling it, getting him to do a unconventional long deal, which was not in his best interest to maximize his career earnings. But they're going to keep working with them as need be and adjust the cash flow forward. At some point, they're probably going to have to redo it as quarterback salaries take off. But as I said earlier, as long as Howie keeps hitting on the right guys, then this whole void concept and the multiple options will work. The thing is, when you have a voiding years in your contracts, there's going to be a bill that comes due. And I'll use what Tampa did with Tom Brady. That was a team which went cash and cap were the same. So they didn't give signing bonuses. If they didn't restructure contracts, there's no dead money. When you get a 42-year-old quarterback coming in, you're in win now mode. So they started restructuring contracts in a way they didn't. And then with Brady's, they started sticking void dummy years in his contract that once he retired, they had $35 million in dead money because when you void those years, there's proration in most cases, and that becomes a cap charge in that year of the void. They took the hit in 2023. Baker Mayfield exceeded all expectations, and they didn't miss a beat. They made the playoffs again. But that's the problem with the void years, that if you don't convert those into real years in an extension like Dallas did with Dak Prescott, then you're going to have a huge amount of dead money. Because if Dallas hadn't done the deal with Dak Prescott and those years voided and he hit the open market because he had a clause in his contract where they couldn't stick a franchise tag on him, they're going to have over $40 million in dead money in 2025. So that's the drawback of doing contracts with void years in them, just because there's going to be dead money associated with those years if they actually void.
All right, next one comes from Leo Byrne. He said, could you please explain insurance on contracts, specifically in relation to Deshaun Watson? How much cap relief do the Browns get if he doesn't play next year? Thank you. Love the pod. Keep up the great work.
It's not going to be as much as you think, because teams for the bigger contracts, and the Eagles tend to do it for more players than other teams, is only going to be a portion of the contract, and it decreases as the contract goes on. The only thing left, there's $113 million insured initially for Deshaun Watson's contract when he signed. It's down to just 44 and some change this year. That's all that's left. Typically, there's some sort of minimum games you have to miss before it starts paying out. I'll give an example of a payout, which is probably not as much as you would think. Alex Smith, when he had that gruesome injury, he missed 22 straight games. There's $12 million of a signing bonus insured. The insurance cap relief was $4 million. So I expect, just guesstimating, that the cap relief won't be any more than the proration for the first signing bonus that Watson had in the deal. So probably no more than $9 million.
Okay. So it
doesn't work as it's not like if we get every dollar for every game he misses, it doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work like that. All right. Next one here comes from Jarius Norwood. I also think that talking about salaries in terms of percentage of the cap is way more instructive and useful. Could you please put together a few comparisons of top earners between different eras so we can get a real idea of how teams are prioritizing salary cap usage?
I'm not going to look at it that way. I'm going to look at what agents will do is they'll adjust contracts for salary cap inflation. So maybe it's the same thing, but you're not looking at the percentage of the cap. You're looking at what would this contract be if we moved it into today's market. So, and you can get a sense of how things have changed or how positions have become stagnant or they haven't been prioritized as much. I'm going to use Adrian Peterson as an example. Adrian Peterson in 2011 signed an extension averaging $14.2 million per year. The salary cap in 2011 was $120.375 million. If you adjust that and put it into today's $279.2 million cap environment, you're basically at $33 million per year. Saquon just became the first $20 million per year running back. So that kind of tells you how running back salaries have not kept pace with cap inflation. Now, quarterback is the other end of the spectrum. In 2000, exactly, they've skyrocketed. In 2012, Drew Brees became the first $20 million per year player in the NFL. The salary cap in 2012 was $120.6 million. If you adjust that into today's cap environment, you're basically at $46 million. $46 million per year basically gets you at the bottom of the top 10 for quarterbacks now, because you have 9 guys who have contracts of $50 million per year or more. So that's just to give you an example of how teams are starting to value positions. Running back devalued, quarterback has been made more important from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, I will also say that teams have kind of figured out that the cap just shoots through the roof, that the cap is just exploding right now. And so if you just go look through position by position and pretty much outside of running back, the highest contracts versus, contracts that are the highest percentage of cap historically, pretty much every position outside of running back, the top 5 or so are all within the last 4 years, because people have realized that the cap, you saw it from last year, going up $24 million year on year, that people have realized that we can sign these big money deals, push this money out in the future, because, outside of the COVID year, it's going up 10 to 15% seemingly every single year. Whereas back in the late 90s, mid 2000s.
Oh, it didn't go up much because I was an agent back then, and you would do restructures of every deal of any consequence back then just because the cap didn't grow. What they did in 1998, when you had the new TV money, it was like the NBA a few years ago, how Kevin Durant got to Golden State. There was a huge spike. The cap went from, I think, 41 million to 52 million. That's like a 25% increase. And then it barely went up. They've been smoothing it in on a more even basis since then. One position that has been pretty stagnant is off-ball linebacker. In 2019, Bobby Wagner signed for $18 million per year. It's 2025, and Roquan Smith is at $20 million. He's the only $20 million per year off-ball linebacker. That was done in 2023, and I don't see anyone getting past that this year.
Yeah. So
it's like we were talking about Trey Smith earlier, and obviously I paid a lot of attention in 2015, 2016. I was drafted in 2013, Joel. And as you know, the Bears are one of those teams where they don't give you an extension during your rookie deal. You have to earn your second deal through. But I pounded the table and I was like, I will take far less money to get to have some longevity here, to have some insurance. And at the time, the number was like, big number 50, little number 30 in terms of like the guarantee. Right. And now Trey Smith just got tagged and it's like $24.5 million for 1 year. It's staggering how much this thing has changed over the course of just less than a decade. And then I go even further back to like 1984. My old man was the defensive player of the year, and I think he was making $700,000 a year. So we're headed in the right direction. If what we're looking for is for all of our guys to get taken care of, and agents and everybody who drinks from the rivers of the National Football League. But I think sometimes we lose sight of how far we have come when guys are still bitching about the way things are done now.
Oh, you're exactly right. And your dad played in an era where there was no free agency. That whatever team drafted you, you were there, or they traded you. They had this weird free agency plan at one time in the late 1980s, early 90s called Plan B free agency, where you could protect like 35 to 40 players so they couldn't hit the open market. So it was the guys you didn't want to hit the open market. They'd go out in some cases set the market because they were free. They had like a window to do a deal, kind of like restricted free agents whose rights revert back if you don't sign during the window. And then those deals would drive up the market for the stars, superstar players. It was a weird system that the guys you didn't want could be free, and the guys that
the non-coveted guys were setting the market for the coveted.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
All right, Jairus actually had another question that I liked here. How come state taxes aren't accounted for in the salary cap? Seems like a pretty huge loophole. A big-time free agent can take on millions per year in take-home pay in Las Vegas versus California, and no one ever brings this up.
Well, that's never been the case. That's never been the case when you're doing the rookie wage scale, because let's take 2023, for example. You had C.J. Stroud, the number 2 pick, go to the Houston Texans. Texas has no state income tax. And you had Bryce Young go to the Carolina Panthers. North Carolina has a pretty significant state income tax. I didn't work the numbers, but I'm fairly positive that the net amount of C.J. Stroud's contract is greater than the net amount of Bryce Young's contract. I used to help represent John Randall, who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
The best.
Yes. So you know exactly who I'm talking about. Aaron Donald before Aaron Donald. Now, when John was made a transition player in 1998, he almost went to the Miami Dolphins. Miami, Florida, no state income tax. We have the accountant run numbers for what the Vikings would have to do from a gross standpoint to equal what the offer was with the Dolphins. He ultimately re-signed with Minnesota, but the gross amount, the actual what was on paper, was greater than what he was going to sign in Miami. So we were looking at it from that standpoint back then.
All right, next one here, and I will just say this. It's like a handicap. Lobby your state to get lower taxes. If you're a fan of a team, it's a handicap.
I do know for a fact from a previous experience that Jerry Jones will bring that up in a negotiation. We don't have any state income tax in Texas, so you need to take less. And it was like, do you want to get this guy signed? If you do, then that's a non-starter. We're not factoring that in the equation.
I love it. All right. This one comes from Jared. He says, how does a tag and trade work from a cap dead money perspective? He brings up Sam Darnold, but obviously he didn't get tagged. So so T. Higgins with the Bengals, if they were to trade him and that was a $26.2 million hit, what does that do for their cap for the Cincinnati Bengals?
Okay, well, the way it works, as soon as you put the tag on someone, he counts against your cap whether he signs his tender or not. So Trey Higgins is counting the 26.2 on Cincinnati's cap. If they do a tag and trade, then typically for trade, you have to have enough cap room to assume the player's contract. But if it's a tag and trade, if it's done at the same time, then you don't have to have the 26.2 million first and then do the deal. whatever you do for the deal and whatever your cap number is on the deal is what you need to acquire the player. The 22.6, the 26.2 million, once Higgins is traded, comes off Cincinnati's books, so they have no dead money.
And so, okay, perfect. Next one here comes from Monty. Given how contracts have been trending upwards in price, how much do you think a top-of-the-line quarterback will be making in 5 years with the new contract?
Wow. Well, there could be a sneaky deal this year which moves the market in some significant way. And I'm not talking about Brock Purdy. I'm talking about Josh Allen. Brandon Beam publicly said he's open to doing an extension with Josh Allen. Josh Allen signed a 6-year extension in 2021 for $43 million per year, so he's underpaid. He's got 4 years left on the extension, so you
underpaid.
You typically don't do an extension that with 4 years left. But perfect timing from him. Won the league MVP. So what is it? $65 million. Dak Prescott moved the market 9% last year. You move the same 9%. That's $65 million. CJ Stroud becomes eligible for an extension after the 2025 regular season ends in January 2026. He needs to revert back to what he did as a rookie as opposed to regressing last year for that to be a consideration. Then in 2027, that's when you can see a huge jump. That's the final year of Lamar Jackson's contract. He has a clause which prevents the Ravens from sticking a franchise tag on him if he plays it out. So in 2027, he holds all the cards. So if he just keeps doing what he's doing or regresses just a slight bit from what he did this year, 75 million maybe at that point.
You know what's a little crazy here? Here's a little history lesson.
And that's not even that far out. We're not even getting to 5 years out. 5 years out is going to be
in 1921. The Staley Starch Company gave Hallis the team, George Hallis, the Chicago Bears, the Decatur Staleys. It was $5,000. So we've come so far as a league that now we're talking about into the 60s and maybe 70s for millions of dollars per year for quarterbacks. Hallis played, coached, and owned the team. Now we've gone to the other end of the spectrum where you've seen Tom Brady play for so long that he can buy into an ownership stake in the Las Vegas Raiders. So we're looking, it's like history repeats itself in a completely different way. And now you're talking about Josh Allen going to redo his deal. He could potentially be buying into an ownership stake with the Buffalo Bills when this is all said and done. And all these quarterbacks, as a matter of fact, would have that opportunity. I feel like it is, I can't even fathom the amount of money that's being made by these guys now. And the decisions they have to make, weighing in situations. Sam Darnold, for instance, in Minnesota, there's uncertainty about his role on the team. But you look at that poll that they take about ranking teams 1 through 32 in terms of staff, in terms of cafeteria, in terms of weight room, the way they treat your family, the parking situation. You know how it goes, Joel. All the stuff that I and my family may bitch about if I'm part of a franchise. Does Sam Darnold say, well, the money's so good that I would just rather take a spot in Minnesota and take my chances here as opposed to ending up in X, Y, or Z city that ranks at the bottom of the list?
He might be a little particular because of how his career started. The Jets set him up for failure. In Carolina, that owner has been going through coaches left and right. So he may value some things that other guys wouldn't because of his history. So he may look at other things outside of money a little more than some other players. Now, if the money is X and it's A, and we're talking apples and oranges, that probably goes out the window. But if they're in the same relative ballpark, I think those considerations might rule the day for Sam Darnold.
This one comes from Dorian Finney-Smith. He says, my question is, will the Broncos have an advantage in free agency being able to pay free agents more money up front because of how wealthy the Walton Penner group is, basically the opposite of the Bengals?
Not really. Where it will come into play is each team has the salary cap and also a cash budget. So their cash budget will be higher, and they'll be more willing to not defer money with a signing bonus. But now players, agents don't necessarily care about the payout of the signing bonus, since you now have salary guarantees in contracts. Initially, when the salary cap was implemented in 1994, the only guaranteed money was a signing bonus. But obviously, you lose the time value of money if you don't get it today as opposed to getting it tomorrow. But that isn't necessarily a major consideration or one of the top considerations for players or agents.
Gotcha. All right, last one here comes from Renaya Tuyasopo. I don't think that's actually his name.
Renaya.
How do escalators / incentives work? Are they guaranteed? And do they count against next year's cap?
Okay, the way most incentives are written is so they're classified as not likely to be earned. And anything individually that you did the year before, if you have an incentive at or below that level, that's considered likely to be earned, and there's a cap charge. So let's say you had an incentive for 50 catches, $1 million for 50 catches, and you caught 60 balls the year before. Because you did that the previous season, it's the immediate prior season, there would be a cap charge. Now, if you had the incentive for 70 catches, since you didn't do that the year before, there wouldn't be a cap charge during the season. At the end of the season, there's a reconciliation where all the likely to be earned incentives that were counting that weren't earned and the not likely to be earned incentives that were achieved are netted out. So a team could end up losing $5 million of cap space or gaining $5 million, depending upon how that shaked out. Now, escalators are a little interesting. Most escalators aren't guaranteed. So say you have some sort of, say if you get 1,000 yards, your base salary for the next year increases by $2 million. Well, it's typically not guaranteed, so they could cut you and you never get to $2 million. I do know of a case where that happened. John Abraham, the edge rusher, the Falcons, really good edge rusher, hit an escalator, and then the Falcons cut him before he could actually earn it. The only escalator I've seen that was guaranteed is Ryan Fitzpatrick had an escalator with the Dolphins, where anything that he earned in incentives was added to the base salary, and it was the following year's base salary, and it was guaranteed.
Interesting. I always have been curious about. So, like, say you have like a really lofty sort of incentive where it's like 100 catches. Guys never reached 100 catches, but
20 and a half sacks, John Abraham. Then he goes and gets it.
Yeah, like gets it. And then so the next year, say it's like a really like a $5 million. Can you go over? Has the team ever like gone over the cap because an incentive ended up being?
Well, it doesn't count immediately when you hit it. It's a year in reconciliation. So if you don't have the room, then it gets deducted from the next year's cap. So Kansas City last year had a ton of incentives that were earned. So they lost about $5 million of cap space. So it put them in a little bit of a deficit compared to everybody else.